Welcome back. We start with US President Donald Trump, who has become the third president in nation's history to be impeached by the House of Representatives. The House voted to impeach Trump for obstruction of Congress and abuse of power related to his dealings with Ukraine. This report has all the details.
Donald Trump has formally joined the exclusive club of impeached presidents. He now faces trial in the Senate, but his removal from the White House will be very difficult in a Republican-controlled upper house.
I've made up my mind about the accusations. I've seen the transcript. I understand the basic tenets of what Sunderland's saying is hearsay upon hearsay. I've never believed this was an impeachable offense. I've got no problem with the phone call. The guy ran on corruption, and there's been questions for a long time about why the guy was fired.
On Tuesday, Trump accused House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of declaring war on American democracy in a 6-page open letter. The Republican Party has been united in supporting Trump while he continues his aggressive approach.
They're lousy politicians, but they have two things. They're vicious. They're the most vicious people. The Republicans aren't as vicious. They may learn to be vicious after going through this stuff. But the other thing, the Democrats always stick together. Now think of it. 3 Democrats went over to our side, no Republicans. It's unheard of.
Donald Trump's predecessors, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, were the only U.S. presidents to face impeachment. Johnson was accused of 11 impeachment articles, while Clinton faced perjury and obstruction of justice inquiries.
Moving on to the US Congress, which has decided to impose extra sanctions on banks and companies dealing with North Korea. The sanctions bill is named after Otto Warmbier, an American student who died in the US after being detained in North Korea for over a year. The bill lists mandatory sanctions on North Korean textile imports and exports of coal and other minerals. Yesterday, a bipartisan group of U.S. senators warned Pyongyang of further economic embargo in response to any provocations. Earlier, China and Russia proposed a draft UN resolution calling for some sanctions against North Korea to be lifted. In a related development, China and Japan have both agreed to work on North Korea's denuclearization, while tensions grow between Washington and Pyongyang. The understanding was reached after a meeting between Japanese Defense Minister Taro Kono and his Chinese counterpart, General Wei Fengze, in Beijing. The two sides discussed the importance of fulfilling UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea. Expressing a desire to increase mutual trust, Kono said that there are still concerns between the two countries, including the East China Sea. Tokyo and Beijing also decided on strengthening communication. This is the first visit by a Japanese defense chief to China since 2009. Moving on to India, where government has banned large public gatherings in the states of Karnataka, Lucknow and Uttar Pradesh. The move is in response to mass demonstrations against the controversial new citizenship law. In Karnataka, police have banned gatherings for the next 3 days, while UP police ask people not to take part in protests. Earlier, the government imposed Section 144 in some parts of New Delhi. People have appeared on the capital streets despite police refusing permission for protests. More demonstrations have been planned for today in 10 cities, including Mumbai, Pune and Hyderabad. Pakistan Army says it will befittingly respond to any Indian misadventure along the line of control. Earlier, Indian Army Chief Bipin Rawat said the situation along the LOC can escalate anytime. Military spokesman General Asif Ghafoor said Indian Army Chief's provocative statement is an effort to divert world's attention from citizenship law protests. Earlier, Pakistan Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says India has partially removed the fence on the LOC in 5 sectors. In a letter to UNSC, he said India has deployed BrahMos anti-tank, guided and spike missiles for use across the LOC. Pakistan has rejected India's baseless allegations of persecution of religious minorities in the country. Citing pre-partition data of 1941 census, India claimed minorities declined from 23% in 1947 to 3.7% in 2011 in Pakistan. In a statement, Pakistan Foreign Office said Delhi has omitted two major events of migration in 1947 and separation of East Pakistan. The office said total population of minorities in Pakistan has increased by over 0.5% in 47 years. It also said the Hindu population in Pakistan has increased from 1.5% in 1951 to nearly 2% in 1998. Pakistan's former president Pervez says the court's decision to sentence him to death for subverting the constitution is suspicious. Speaking from a hospital in Dubai, Musharraf says he was not allowed to defend himself in court. The ex-president added he was targeted by people serving in important positions. Musharraf said he hopes justice will be done according to the constitution. Earlier, the Pakistan Army said it felt anguish at the court decision. The former president is currently in Dubai after being allowed to leave Pakistan for medical treatment in 2016. A delegation of officials from Myanmar has visited a camp of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. They say the visit is part of Nayibao Dao's scheme to repatriate people forced from their homes by the 2017 military operation in Rakhine State. Myanmar says it has been ready to accept Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh for a year. It has built camps near the Bangladesh-Myanmar border to receive them. Myanmar does not recognize the Rohingya as a native ethnic group. Rohingya people still in Myanmar are denied citizenship and cannot travel freely. Amnesty International has called this apartheid-like conditions. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the fate of the world's Muslims is no longer in the hands of 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Speaking at the Kuala Lumpur summit, Erdogan said the world is bigger than the 5 veto power states. He said despite attempts to silence Turkey, Ankara insists on calling attention to Palestine, the Rohingya, Libya, Somalia, and Syria. Also speaking at the summit, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani condemned the US for threatening sanctions on other countries. Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad said the Muslim world is passing through a state of crisis and the summit may find solutions to these challenges. Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Saad Hariri has announced he will no longer pursue the top job. In a statement, Hariri said he will be involved in selecting a new premier despite his withdrawal. It remains unclear who will be the next prime minister, with Hariri's Future Movement parliamentary bloc set to meet later this morning. Any prime minister must be approved by a majority of the 128-member legislature. Hariri made his announcement 50 days after resigning the post against a background of massive protests against the ruling elite. Bolivia's prosecutors have issued an arrest warrant for exiled ex-president Evo Morales on sedition and terrorism charges. The interim government claims Morales promoted violent clashes that led to 35 deaths before and after he left office. Police have confirmed the warrant. Last month, Interior Minister Arturo Morello filed a criminal complaint against the former socialist leader. The case against Morales centers on a video where he is allegedly directing a Bolivian man to plan roadblocks. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. In Spain, thousands of pro-independence protesters took to the streets of Barcelona during a football match between Barcelona and Real Madrid. 46 demonstrators were injured and 5 others arrested in clashes with the police. Thousands of fans inside the stadium held up banners urging the government to hold talks with Catalan separatists. More protesters gathered outside the stadium, chanting independence and calling for people they described as political prisoners to be freed. The match was postponed in October over protests against the conviction of 9 Catalan separatist leaders. In the UK, the Queen will set out the Conservative government's agenda for the year ahead in today's state opening of Parliament. This follows Boris Johnson's decisive election win last week. Legislation to take the UK out of the EU on January 31st will be among the more than 20 bills announced. Downing Street said an ambitious program of far-reaching domestic reforms will be put before MPs, with health services among the priorities. When the pageantry is over, the Parliament will be asked to immediately begin ratifying the Brexit agreement PM Johnson negotiated in October. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, Doctors Without Borders says nearly 700,000 people have been displaced by violence this year. In a statement, the group said the displaced people are now living in camps or with host families. It said over 10,000 children are suffering from malnutrition and over 2,000 were targets of sexual violence. The agency said it has treated twice as many victims of sexual violence as last year. North Kivu province is one of the most dangerous zones in Africa's Great Lakes region. Militia groups have controlled much of the province since the Congo Wars of the 1990s. It's been a tough year for Somalia. The country was hit by a drought at the start of 2019, which was immediately followed by the worst floods in its history. The environmental disaster has displaced 180,000 people. This report has all the details.
In early 2019, Maka Abdi Ali's goats were dropping dead from thirst. The struggling shepherd would hope for rain every day. But when she finally got her wish, nature proved unmerciful once again.
The recent drought claimed 64 of my goats, only 7 remained for me. But later I sold them to survive. Now I don't have anything.
This arid country in the Horn of Africa has always struggled with a tough environment. Erratic rain patterns and droughts are a constant feature of life here. But weather-related catastrophes are now occurring with greater frequency and intensity. This has had serious consequences for Somalia, which has already been ravaged by years of war.
All farmlands near this town were swept by floods. Local businessmen's inventories were destroyed, and farmers who used to grow vegetables, fruits, and cash crops were also hit badly.
In May, the UN launched a drought appeal, warning that Somalians were facing mass starvation. Now it's asked for help again, saying it needs $72 million to distribute aid to over 500,000 Somali flood victims. But government officials say most of this money will likely be wasted on short-term solutions.
It's a shame that international donors spend $50 to $60 million on emergency humanitarian services every time, while it would be better to spend only a few million on long-term solutions, like building a dam.
$5 million, $6 million, $7 million.
100,000 of the 180,000 internally displaced persons still can't return home and remain stuck in makeshift camps. Meanwhile, the UN says over 200,000 of those affected by the floods still haven't received any aid whatsoever.
The Global Alliance on Health and Pollution says India led the world in pollution-linked deaths in 2017, followed by China and Nigeria. In a report, the body found pollution to be the largest environmental cause of premature death on the planet, claiming 8 million lives. In 2017, India and China suffered 2.3 million and 1.8 million deaths, respectively. The report says India has seen increasing industrial pollution, with bad sanitation and contaminated indoor air a factor in poor communities. It has divided risk factors into air, water, occupational, and lead. The agency said pollution is a global crisis which worsens every day. A staggering 8 million tons of plastic end up in the world's oceans every year. Much of it finds its way into the ocean from canals and rivers. Now, a local company in Amsterdam is working to remove plastic trash hidden under the city's waterways. This report has more on cleansing the canals.
Plastic waste, whether in a river, ocean, or on land, can persist in the environment for centuries. According to a German environmental research company, rivers are carrying up to 4 million metric tons of plastic into the sea each year. In Amsterdam, bubble barrier technology is being used to remove the plastic from its canals.
The Great Bubble Barrier is an idea that also can catch plastics which it's under the water surface, and also the smaller pieces which the boats don't get.
The company claims the bubbles don't interfere with passing boats and don't pose any danger to fish or birds.
A bubble barrier is basically a tube that we place on the bottom of a river or canal. It has holes in it and we press air through it, and that creates a bubble curtain like you see behind me. The air brings plastics that are floating in the water to the surface, and because we place it in an angle, it redirects the natural flow of the river and the plastics that are in there to the side where we collect it and where it can be removed.
The United Nations says people need to improve the management of plastic waste.
Less plastic is flowing out to the North Sea, and otherwise we also want to give insight into the total plastic problem, because the best is of course that no plastic falls into water in the first place.
The company launched the Bubble Barrier project last month after a small-scale test. If the project is successful, they have planned to deploy it in other parts of the country as well.
Saudi Arabia is organizing a falconry festival meant to raise awareness on the preservation of the birds of prey. The festival hosted a record-breaking 2,350 falcons, with teams from the UAE, Kuwait and Bahrain participating. More on this falconry festival in this report.
Humans have been using falcons to hunt since 2000 BC. Arab Bedouins once relied on these animals to catch meat in the winter. But such an exercise is no longer necessary, as falcon racing has emerged as a popular sport in the Arabian Gulf.
Now in the Gulf, we have in large part some of the best falcon breeders in the world. Thank God and their acquisition of the best species, whether from the UAE or across the Gulf. Today, Gulf states are embracing distinct rare species from around the world.
Apart from being culturally significant, breeding for falcon racing also prevents these animals from going extinct. Raising awareness about the preservation of these birds of prey is one of the reasons the King Abdul Aziz Falconry Festival was organized.
With falcon races, we can stay away from hunting these wild birds, while at the same time, we can use it to increase their numbers. This race in itself is a form of education for falconers, so they leave wild birds alone where they belong, and we use farms to produce birds for these races.
This year's festival broke the world record for most birds to participate in a race. 2,350 birds were put up against each other's in this year's contest, with the previous record standing at only 1,723. Riyadh has also created nature reserves with bird farms to further boost falcon numbers.
Amazon, Apple and Google are partnering up to improve the compatibility of their smart home products. They have called the scheme Project Connected Home over IP.
Three of the world's biggest tech companies, Apple, Amazon and Google, have put aside years of competition to create a joint technology standard. The new benchmark is aimed at smart home products like Amazon's Echo, Apple's HomePod and Google's Home. The businesses say they want to develop and promote a new royalty-free connectivity standard. They said it would increase compatibility among smart home products, with security as a fundamental feature.
Stock markets across Asia are trading lower amid a lack of momentum and very little stimulus. Investors are taking profits ahead of holiday trade and waiting for further data on global economy. Hong Kong's Hang Seng is trading over 0.5% lower as shares in index heavyweight Tencent dropped over 1%. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 is trading fractionally lower after shares of Family Mart dropped over 2%. The Shanghai Composite has also retreated a fraction as investors waited for more details on the Phase 1 trade deal between Washington and Beijing. Seoul's Kospi is largely flat as SK Hynix stock surged about 2% on the back of Micron posting a first quarter beat on the top and bottom line. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.